Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be with you. I apologize if some of you have heard me speak before. It happens. I was speaking at a foster grandparents gathering. It was their large gathering, and I had spoken at it the year before. And afterwards, this grandmother cornered me. I think she liked the talk. Her eyes were filled with tears, and she grabbed my hands, and she said, "I heard you last year. It never gets better." And kind of hoping she misspoke there, but maybe I'm delusional. All of us are here because we want to answer the call, and I'm going to just sort of be aerial view. I think the call is about a vision of wanting to, in the end, in our world, make it look differently than it currently looks. I think we want to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. It's sort of the goal of education anyway. The prophet Habakkuk writes, "The vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it." But none of us want to wait for too long, con los brazos cruzados and tapping our feet and staring at our watches. We want to make something happen. And in the end, it's about a creating of a community that's united, where there is no us and them, where we obliterate once and for all the separation that we are divided and that we're separate. Mother Teresa, I think, diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? How do we imagine a circle of compassion and then seek through education to dismantle the barriers that exclude? How do we imagine a circle of compassion and then truly have our educational efforts seek to insist that nobody stand outside that circle? And so we always have to find ways, new and imaginative, to stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. How can we, in fact, stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear? How can we stand again and again with those whose needs are more than they can handle and whose dignity has been denied? How can we stand even with the despised easily and the throwaways? How can we stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop? I suspect if kinship was our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice. We would, in fact, be celebrating it. For an idea has taken root in the world. It's at the root of all that's wrong with it. And the idea is this, that there just might be lives out there that matter less than other lives. So how do we stand against that? It's been the privilege of my life to work with gang members for the last 25 years. They've taught me all the things that are of value. I know a homie named Caesar, and nobody got more chances at employment through Homeboy Industries than this guy Caesar. But either in our businesses or in the private sector, we'd locate something for him. But he'd always kind of gravitate back to usually getting high or selling drugs or some vague criminality. But this one time he had finished an 8-month stretch in prison, and he came to see me, and he says what gang members often say, "This time it'll be different." And I go, well, all right. So I pick up the phone with him right there, and I call a friend of mine who runs a vending machine company in Alhambra, California, and I ask him to hire this guy Caesar, and he does. And 2 weeks later, Caesar, who's about 25 years old at the time of this story, a very funny kid, a dangerous sense of humor, very smart, he comes into my office and he's proudly waving his first paycheck, and he says, "Damn, gee, this paycheck makes me feel proper. I mean, my mom, she's proud of me, and my kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job." And I said, "Well, gosh, who?" And he looked at me strangely, and he said, "Well, God, of course." I said, "Oh, yeah, no, that's right." "No, absolutely, yeah, God." And he said, "You thought I was going to say you." And I said, "No, gosh, God's number one, yeah." He said, "You are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days." And I'm sorry, them Genesis days? He goes, "Yeah, because God would have had struck down your ass already by now," he said, which I guess he told me. But suddenly kinship so quickly, suddenly something gets bridged. It's not about service provider and service recipient. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez, and I remember a reporter had commented to him once, said, "Wow, these farm workers, they sure love you." And he shrugged and he smiled and he said, "The feeling's mutual." That's what we hope for in education, is a kind of mutuality. And certainly in our world where there is no us and them, there's just us. All of us are called to be what Alice Miller, the late great child psychologist, calls enlightened witnesses. That's what educators do for a living. Through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love, you return kids to themselves, and in the process, you find yourself returned to yourself. We don't ever hold the bar up, actually, and ask people to measure up. You just show up, and you hold the mirror up, and you tell the truth, knowing that your truth is my truth, and my truth is a gang member's truth, and it's all the same truth. And here's the truth. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch people, especially on the margins, become that truth. You watch them inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce that. And no four prison walls can keep that out. And death can't touch it because it's huge. But often the task in answering the call is to dismantle messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way. The great scripture scholar Marcus Borg says that the principal suffering of the poor throughout history is shame and disgrace, and I think he's quite right. As a priest, I'm in 25 different detention facilities where I say Mass for kids who are locked up in all the probation camps and juvenile halls and such. And then because for 25 years I've lived in the community of Dolores Mission, where I was pastor of this parish for 6 years, the poorest parish in the city, nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. And together they comprise the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. I go back there, and since I live in that community, I know everybody. I get asked to do stuff. So after I say masses in the detention facilities on a Saturday, my Saturdays always look the same. I race back, and I have a baptism at 1, and a quinceañera at 2 when a girl turns 15, and a wedding at 3, and exorcism at 4, and just checking to see if you're still listening to me. I've never done one of those. But one day, I came home, and it was 20 minutes to 1, and I said, well, I'm going to go in, and I'm going to kind of go through my mail. And so I'm by myself reading my mail, and suddenly this woman walks in. I find out her name is Lisa, and she's 34 years old. This is the first time she's ever stepped foot in my office. People have seen her around. She's kind of a street person, heroin addict, prostitute, gang member, felon, parolee. She's something of a famous gritona and a peleonera. She's always screaming. She's always fighting. You can hear her scream at the guy who tosses her out of the bar every day. You can hear her scream into payphones, "Just let me stay tonight," pleading with family members or friends. And this is the first time she's ever stepped foot in my office, and now I notice that it's 7 minutes to 1. And she comes into my office, and she launches right in. She says, "I need help. Oh, I've been to like 50 rehabs. I'm known all over, nationwide. Went to Catholic schools all my life," she says. Graduated from elementary. I even graduated from Sacred Heart High School in Lincoln Heights. And then she gets quiet and still. And she says, "In fact, first time I ever used heroin was right after I graduated. And I've been trying to stop since the moment I began." And I watched as she leaned her head behind her on the wall, and her eyes became like two ponds, water rising to meet its edges and spilling over. And she cried, until suddenly she leveled her gaze at me. And she said with great deliberation, "I am a disgrace." And suddenly her shame meets mine, because when I had seen her step into my office that afternoon, I had mistaken her for an interruption. It's mutual. We all hold the mirror up and return people to themselves, and we hope that the soul will feel its worth. a sense of renewed dignity. That's how we answer the call, and that's what we're called to do. Homeboy Industries was started, I guess, when I was pastor, when I buried my first young person in 1988, and I buried my 176th 2 months ago. First thing we did was start a school, because there were so many junior high age kids who were out of school. And so we started a school that brought gang members to the church. They kept saying if only we had jobs. Then we tried to find felony-friendly employers, and that wasn't so forthcoming. And so by 1992, we started to start businesses. Homeboy Bakery in 92, this old bakery across the street from the church. A month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in Grand Central Market. Once we had plural, we came up with the highfalutin Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved. And not everything worked. Anything worth doing is worth failing at. You know, Homeboy Plumbing was not a huge success, as who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. And now we didn't set out to do this, but we're now the largest gang intervention, rehab, and reentry program in the country. 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors. There are 1,100 gangs in LA County, 86,000 gang members. You name anything that might be helpful, and we do it for them. Every curricular imaginable offering, from anger management to parenting to grief and loss. We have mental health counselors, case managers. We have free tattoo removal. No place on the planet removes more tattoos. We have 3 laser machines, 27 volunteer doctors, 800 treatments a month. If any of you right now are starting to regret your GFE tattoo, see me afterwards, no questions asked. And then we have all our businesses, Homeboy Bakery still. We have a solar panel installation training program. We have Homeboy Diner, the only place you can get food in the city hall. 27 farmers markets, Homeboy Silkscreen, our biggest business. Homeboy Homegirl Merchandise, and Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. Some months ago, Oscar-winning actress Diane Keaton showed up, she of Annie Hall and Godfather movies. It's their first time there. She's there with a regular. And her waitress this day is Glenda, and Glenda is a homegirl, been there, done that, been to prison, tattooed, felon, parolee. She doesn't know who Diane Keaton is. So she's taking her order, and Diane Keaton says, "What do you recommend?" And Glenda rattles off her 3 favorite platillos, and Diane Keaton says, "Oh, I like that second one. That sounds good." And then something dawns on Glenda. She looks at Diane Keaton. She says, "Wait a minute. I feel like I know you, like we've met somewhere." And Diane Keaton decides to sort of deflect it humbly. "Oh, gosh, I don't suppose I have one of those faces, you know, that people think they've seen before." And Glenda goes, "No, now I know. We were locked up together." And suddenly kinship so quickly. Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress. Exactly what God had in mind, and if you'll permit me, I think Jesus says it succinctly, that you may be one. That's the call we all answer. It's the whole point of education, that we may be one, divided in no way. Homie who was most resistant to all my offers of help was a kid named Bandit. He lived in Aliso Village Housing Project, gang member, sold drugs. I used to ride my bike in the middle of the night there, and I'd see him run up to cars and sell crack cocaine, and he'd walk away counting his money. And I'd say, "How about a real job?" And he'd say, "I'm okay. Thanks, though." Very polite. Till one day, 15 years ago, Bandit shows up in my office, and I couldn't believe he was there. And he says what homies often say, "I'm tired of being tired." So I walk him to one of our 4 job developers, and as luck would have it, they locate an entry-level, unskilled, low-paid job in a warehouse, first kind of job. Now cut to today, Bandit runs the whole shooting match. He's the supervisor of all the supervisors. He owns his own home. He's married, has 3 kids. Well, I hadn't heard from him in a long time, so he calls me on a Friday afternoon late, a little bit breathless and panicky. He says, "Gee, you gotta bless my daughter." I said, "¿Qué pasó? Is she sick? Is she in the hospital?" Oh, no. On Sunday, she's going to Humboldt College. Imagine my oldest, my Jessica. She's going to college. But that's way up north. That's far. I don't know. We're scared for her because she's a little chaparrita. Do you think you could give her a blessing before she goes? And I go, are you kidding? I'd be honored. Look, tomorrow's Saturday. I have an exorcism at 1. Why don't you come at 12:30 and we'll do a little send-off? And sure enough, they show up, the whole family, Bandit and his wife and the 3 kids with little Jessica. And I situate her in front of the altar. I said, let's surround her with our bodies and our love, and everybody touch her, grab her arms, put your hands on her shoulder. Go ahead, put your hands on her head. And I say, bow your heads and close your eyes. And as the homies say, I do a long-ass prayer. I go on, and somewhere in the middle of this prayer, I notice we've all become chillones, We're all crying, and I don't know why we're crying exactly, except for the fact that Bandit and his wife do not know anybody who's ever gone to college except me. Certainly nobody in their families. So, we kind of wipe away our tears and we laugh about how mushy we got. And to change the subject, I look at Jessica. Hey, what are you going to study at Humboldt College? She was very quick. Forensic psychology. I go, damn, forensic psychology. And Bandit chimes in, yeah, she wants to study the criminal mind. And Jessica, very deadpan, looks at her father and she does one of these, and he sees her, he gets the joke, and he says, yeah, I'm going to be her first subject. So we walk out to the car, and big abrazos, and they pile in the car, but Bandit hangs back, and I said, hey, can I tell you something? I give you credit for the man you've chosen to become, for choosing to walk in your own footsteps. I'm proud of you. And his eyes fill up with tears, and he says, ¿Sabes qué? I'm proud of myself. All my life, people called me a lowlife, a bueno para nada, a good for nothing. I guess I showed them. I said, yeah, I guess you did. And the soul feels its worth. Exactly right. I'll end with this. And people always ask me about homies, enemies working together. And it's tense at first. A homie will come in and say, hey, I want to work, I'm ready. And I'll say, all right, I have an opening at the bakery, but you have to work with X, Y, and Z, and I rattle off the names of enemies. And they always say the same thing. They think for a long time, and then they go, well, I'll work with them, I'm not going to talk to them. Which used to bother me in the old days until you discover, of course, that human beings can't demonize people they know. You can't sustain it. So this one day I had a kid everybody called Youngster from this one gang, and I thought he was ready. And so I bring him to our Homeboy silkscreen factory, where there are about 30 co-workers there, and I'm going to introduce him to each one on the floor of this huge factory. And he's shaking hands and looking them in the eyes, even enemies, and I think, wow, this is great. Until Youngster gets around the bend and he finds this kid named Puppet, and Puppet is sort of trying to avoid contact with this guy. And when they're in each other's vicinity, they mumble something, they stare at their feet, they don't shake hands. Well, I know they're enemies because I know what gangs they hail from, but he just finished shaking hands with other enemies. I discovered later that this is a hatred so deep and personal, they do not think they can get past it. So I sensed that much in the moment, and I look at them and I said, hey, if you guys can't hang working together, let me know. I got all these people who want this job. And they don't say anything. Some 6 months later, Puppet is walking to a store not too far from his house, and he picks something up, and then he takes a shortcut home, cuts through an alley, and because he's decided to take this alternate route, he finds himself suddenly surrounded by 10 members of an enemy gang, 10 against 1. They beat him badly. He falls to the ground, and while he's lying there, they will not stop kicking his head until he's lifeless. Somebody finds him and takes him to White Memorial Hospital, where he's declared effectively brain dead, though they keep him connected to machines, as is the policy, for 48 hours so they can get a flat read for 2 days. This allowed family and friends to gather. I was at St. Louis University giving a talk. I flew home. I've seen a lot of horrible things in my life, nothing to compare to the sight of this young man with his head swollen many times its size. Horrifying. You could not train your eyes on him. So I did a final blessing at the end of the 48 hours. I anointed him with oil, and we disconnected, and I buried him a week later. But in the first 24 hours, I'm in my office alone at night. It's 8:30. The phone rings. It's Youngster, Puppet's co-worker at the silkscreen. He says, "Hey, that's messed up about what happened to Puppet." I said, "Yeah, it is." And then with a certain kind of eagerness even, he says, "Is there anything I can do? Can I give him my blood?" And we both fall silent under the weight of it until he breaks the silence, choking back his tears. And he says with great deliberation, "He was not my enemy. He was my friend. We worked together." Now, can I say that always happens? Yeah. Any exceptions? No. And it shouldn't surprise us that God's own dream come true for us, that we be one, just happens to be our own deepest longing for ourselves. Turns out it's mutual. We answer the call, we guide education in one direction, the formation of a community of kinship. For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it. Thank you very much. Have a great conference.